I'm Tim Morrison for Time, and this is 10 Questions with author Salman Rushdie. The new book is called Luka and the Fire of Life. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We can just start with the first one, which is about your new book. Eugene Hong, who's a reader in Normal, Illinois, wants to know, how is Luka and the Fire of Life different from your earlier work?
Well, the one of my books that it has a lot in common with is Haroun and the Sea of Stories. In fact, the two are a kind of pair, because they are the two books that I wrote basically for my two sons. And in that sense, they're different from all the others because they have this desire to talk to younger readers and not just to grown-ups. But the thing that I found when I wrote the first one just 20 years ago, when my older son was 12, 13 years old, was that there's this very interesting area, I think, in fiction now, which exists on this kind of blurred boundary between books for adults and books for younger readers. And obviously Harry Potter is the most famous example of that. But Philip Pullman's books and lots of other books. And I thought that's a very interesting place to try and put a book, where a young person can read it and get one kind of pleasure, and an adult can read it and get a slightly different kind of pleasure.
Now, you were born in Bombay, which is now Mumbai, in India. We have a question from a reader who asks, it's often said that it's impossible to describe India in one word. Could you please try?
Well, I think the thing that I felt when I started writing about India, way back when I was writing Midnight's Children, if you go to India, you are immediately struck by the crowd. The crowd is the great fact, and so my question that I asked myself was, how do you represent in a book, on a page, how do you represent that multitude? How do you represent a crowd? And so I thought the answer is that you tell a crowd of stories, that you literally overcrowd your narrative, on purpose, overcrowd your narrative with too much incident, too many people, too much going on, so that your main story kind of has to push its way through the crowd. So I think the one word would be crowd or multitude.
Now, you've recently said that you are working on your memoirs. Mm-hmm. Do you find it's harder to write about your life than it is to write fiction, or easier, or about the same?
Well, it's very different is what it is. It's easier in some ways because you know the story. It's harder in other ways because you're dealing with living people. So questions of appropriateness and taste come in because you're not only dealing with your own private life, you're dealing with other people's private lives. And so the question of what is right to talk about and what is wrong is a thing which comes up every sentence, more or less. You have to make those decisions more or less instinctively, but you do have to make them all the way along. That's very different.
And the story you're telling here is your entire life?
Because this event happened in my life after the publication of the Satanic Verses, that became, of course, a very large, kind of global event.
It's been a while. I mean, just to lay out the chronology, the book, The Satanic Verses, came out in 1989. That year,
88 in England,
88
89 here.
At 89, the Ayatollah of Iran declared a fatwa calling for your death. And it was 10 years, really, before the Iranian government...
Yeah, just about 1998, sort of. Right. Yeah, it's when it sort of ended.
Is when it sort of ended.
Yeah, and the truth is that an enormous amount of what happened has never come out in public. I mean, a lot of it was just undercover, and so there's a bit of me, there's a writer bit of me, which is sitting on this good story. And if you're sitting at a certain point, you have to tell the story. So the starting point was that, tell the story of that event, which was about 9 years, start to finish, 10 years. But of course, in order to tell that story properly, you have to go back and tell an earlier story. How did this person become the person who wrote that book? And where did it come from? After
this entire sort of ordeal, is going back to normal really an option? Can that really happen?
Well, I mean, it has happened. I mean, it's what I have been for the last dozen years leading. I mean, put it like this: my younger son Milan, for whom I wrote Luka and the Fire of Life, really for him, that is a period that it's not been part of his life. Whereas, of course, he's had a more or less normal childhood, which has not been involved with security procedures and so on. I mean, his older brother, of course, grew up through those years and had a very different experience.
But those sort of security precautions aren't really as much part of your...
No, they're not at all, really. In fact, the subject only comes up when I'm talking to journalists. So.
I'm sure it does, in fact. Which, if any, of your books would you like to see made into a movie?
Well, I mean, actually, there's a project right now to make a film of Midnight's Children, and I've written the screenplay, and it's going to be directed by the Canadian-Indian director Deepa Mehta, who made the film
Water,
right. Yeah, Water, Fire, Earth, that trilogy. But Water, of course, was Oscar nominated and so on. And that's we're in the process of setting that up. So hopefully we can make that.
Our last question comes from a reader in Sao Paulo, Brazil, who wants to know, what will you do the day you decide you're no longer interested in writing?
That I don't foresee that day. I mean, the question is a very good question, because what would I do? I mean, I can't think of anything else I would do, so I better do this.
Great. All right. Salman Rushdie, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.